went to St. Andrews the first time, I have to be honest, and I have to say that I didn't like it. I say, well, this is the golf course that I don't see any trees, I see bunkers and all over the place. And when I was playing the front nine, I see bunkers. I say, what the hell, this bunker is here? I mean, this bunker is not even in play.
Golf legends have said some shocking things about Seve Ballesteros, and Paul Azinger called him the Master of Gamesmanship. That wasn't a compliment. Seve was brilliant, maybe the most naturally gifted player of his generation, but his rivals saw something darker. They saw a man who refused to play by the gentlemanly code that had governed golf for decades. Why did the Americans despise him so intensely? What made Hale Irwin so furious that their feud lasted for years? And how did Seve's behavior transform the Ryder Cup from a friendly exhibition into psychological warfare? The story starts long before Seve became a champion. In 1976, a 19-year-old Spaniard faced Hale Irwin at Wentworth during the World Match Play Championship. Irwin was already a US Open winner, a man who built his game on discipline and precision. Seve was an unknown prodigy with a reputation for audacity. During their match, Irwin noticed something that made him furious. The young Spaniard was carefully repairing spike marks on the greens, a practice that pushed the boundaries of what was allowed. To Irwin, this wasn't just a young player being meticulous. It was arrogance, a willingness to manipulate the playing surface for advantage. Irwin felt Seve was disrespecting the etiquette of the game, and although Irwin won that match, the bad feelings between them never disappeared. 2 years later came the incident that defined their rivalry forever. At the 1979 Open Championship at Royal Lytham, Seve played a style of golf that defied all logic. He missed fairways constantly, yet his recovery game was so supernatural that he stayed in contention. On the 16th hole, Seve hit his drive wildly to the right, landing in a temporary car park. For someone like Irwin, missing the fairway that badly should result in severe punishment. Instead, Seve saw an opportunity. He played a wedge shot over the parked cars, landed on the green, and made the putt for birdie. He went on to win the Claret Jug. Afterward, the phrase "parking lot champion" started circulating in locker rooms and the press. Seve was convinced Hale Irwin coined the phrase. Irwin denied it, but he didn't deny the sentiment behind it. To Irwin, winning from a car park was an insult to the purity of golf. It suggested Seve was lucky rather than skilled. That accusation infuriated the Spaniard. This moment revealed the core tension. Irwin believed Seve's arrogance was his refusal to be punished by the course. By escaping trouble repeatedly, Seve seemed to mock the game's difficulty. Seve saw the parking lot champion label as jealousy, a refusal to acknowledge that imagination mattered as much as mechanical precision. If you're enjoying this deep dive into golf's most intense rivalries, hit subscribe and drop a comment telling us which Seve moment shocked you the most. The explosion came at the 1980 US Open at Baltusrol. Seve arrived feeling sick with the flu and told his agent something bad would happen. His mood darkened when his brother and caddy was denied access to the clubhouse dining room, a slight Seve interpreted as institutional arrogance by the USGA. On Friday morning, the crisis hit. Seve was eating breakfast, mistakenly believing his tea time was later. When someone found him in a panic, he rushed to the course and arrived just as his playing partners, Hale Irwin and Mark O'Mara, were playing their second shots. Under USGA rules, arriving after your group tees off results in a 2-stroke penalty. Arriving after they play their second shots results in disqualification. Controversy centers on what Hale Irwin did next. Persistent rumors suggested that Irwin, seeing Seve running toward the tee, hurried his second shot to ensure the Spaniard would be disqualified. Whether true or not, the mere existence of the rumor shows how deep the animosity ran. After the disqualification, Irwin was publicly critical. He didn't offer sympathy. Instead, he framed the lateness as a symptom of Seve's arrogance, a belief that the great Seve didn't need to check tee times like ordinary players. Only decades later would Irwin soften his stance, admitting that Seve created unbelievable shots and acknowledging his skill factor. But at the time, Irwin was the primary witness for the prosecution in the case against Seve's character. The Irwin feud illustrated one specific type of tension: institutional order versus individual chaos. Irwin believed golf was a game of rules, schedules, and fairways. Seve's disregard for these things seemed like arrogant belief that he was above the structure of the sport. Seve believed the structure was designed to stifle his creativity, and Irwin represented the policeman of golf, trying to regulate genius into mediocrity. Irwin represented the friction of the 70s. Paul Azinger became the face of hostile, patriotic aggression that defined the Ryder Cups of the early 90s. The feud between Azinger and Seve is perhaps the most famous in Ryder Cup history, escalating beyond mere rivalry into what observers called a force field of conflict. It was Azinger who branded Seve the Master of Gamesmanship. This wasn't a compliment about tactical skill. It was an accusation of unethical behavior. Azinger's critique was that Seve deliberately manipulated the psychological environment to compensate for technical deficiencies or simply to assert dominance. Azinger noted that Seve refused to concede putts, and the rest of the game, nothing was conceded. There was a really tough atmosphere between the guys. This atmosphere wasn't accidental. It was engineered by Seve. The prelude to their total war occurred during the 1989 Ryder Cup at the Belfry. In a crucial singles match, Seve requested to replace his ball, claiming it was scuffed and unfit for play. Under the rules, a player could replace a damaged ball, but the opponent had to agree the damage warranted replacement. Azinger broke with the gentlemanly tradition of taking an opponent's word. He inspected the ball and disputed Seve's claim, arguing the ball was fit for play. The referee sided with Azinger, denying the replacement. Seve was furious. He viewed Azinger's challenge not as a rules check, but as a personal insult to his integrity. He turned to Azinger and delivered a chilling line. "Is this the way you want to play today?" This moment marked the death of courtesy between them. Seve retaliated on the 18th hole. After Azinger hit his drive into the water, Seve demanded to scrutinize Azinger's drop, questioning whether it was taken in the correct spot. The match descended into petty, tense standoff where every inch was contested. Azinger won one up, but he had engaged Seve on the Spaniard's preferred terrain, psychological trench warfare. The rivalry reached its peak at the 1991 Ryder Cup, known as the War on the Shore. The geopolitical backdrop of post-Desert Storm American patriotism amplified the tension. During a foursomes match where Seve and Olazabal faced Azinger and Chip Beck, hostility boiled over. The European team accused the Americans of switching ball compressions, using a softer ball for control and a harder ball for distance on different holes. This was a violation of the one-ball condition, often in effect. Seve reportedly called Azinger a liar during the dispute. Azinger joined a chorus of American players accusing Seve of coughing during his shots. This accusation, that Seve would time a cough to disrupt a backswing, was the ultimate charge of gamesmanship. In a moment of supreme frustration, Azinger tried to get Seve to play a safe shot. Seve was preparing to hit a miraculous recovery shot through a tiny gap in the trees. Azinger, exasperated by Seve's defiance of physics and logic, said, "I know you're Seve Ballesteros, but you're not Paul Daniels, a famous magician. Chip it out, will you please?" Seve ignored him, played the miracle shot, and the ball ended up near the green. Despite the toxicity of that moment, Azinger's retrospective view of Seve is filled with grudging, deep respect. He later admitted Seve was the most passionate player he ever faced. "We just butted heads. I was obviously very passionate and patriotic as well." Azinger realized that Seve's arrogance, the refusal to chip out, the questioning of drops, the intensity, was the catalyst that made the Ryder Cup matter. Seve took the Ryder Cup personal, Azinger said. By taking it personally, Seve forced the Americans to do the same, elevating the event from an exhibition to a war. Raymond Floyd represented the old guard of American golf. He was an intimidating figure in his own right, known for his death stare and intense demeanor. Clash between Floyd and Seve was a collision of two alpha males who refused to yield the psychological high ground. Understand Floyd's critique of Seve, you need to understand Floyd's own reputation. Randall Chamblay recounted a story where Floyd hit a ball directly over the heads of the group ahead without shouting for or asking permission. Chamblay called it the most awesomely arrogant thing he ever witnessed. This context is vital. Seve wasn't introducing arrogance to a humble game. He was countering American entitlement with Spanish defiance. Floyd was central to the specific allegation of weaponized coughing. During the heated 1991 matches, Floyd became convinced that Seve was clearing his throat or coughing specifically when the Americans were over the ball. Unlike younger players who might have been rattled silently, Floyd confronted Seve directly. Floyd walked up to Seve and delivered a menacing ultimatum. "I heard you had a cough yesterday. You won't be having one at all today." Remarkably, reports suggest that Seve's illness mysteriously disappeared after this confrontation. The incident is often cited by American players as proof of Seve's gamesmanship, that the cough was a tactical choice rather than a physiological necessity. The tension dated back to the 1983 Ryder Cup. Paul Way, paired with Seve, recalled being terrified. Seve acted as a shield. Way recounted how Seve puffed out his chest and took on Floyd and Curtis Strange essentially 2-on-1, carrying the young Englishman. Floyd's death stare met Seve's burning eyes. While Floyd heavily criticized Seve's attitude, he was forced to acknowledge the Spaniard's supernatural ability. Alongside Seve during one of his magical rounds, Floyd warned his own partner, "Don't ever make the mistake of thinking that was lucky. He does it too often for it to be that." If Azinger and Floyd were the rivals who fought back, Mark Calcavecchia stands as the tragic example of an opponent broken by Seve's intensity. The 1991 Ryder Cup singles match between them is a case study in how Seve's arrogance, specifically his refusal to accept reality, could dismantle an opponent's psyche. On the final day at Kiowa Island, Calcavecchia held a commanding lead. He was 4-up with 4 holes to play. In match play terms, this is often considered insurmountable. Most players in Seve's position would have resigned themselves to defeat. Seve did not operate in the realm of probability, he operated in the realm of destiny. He refused to concede the match in his mind. This refusal, a form of arrogance that denies objective reality, began to exert terrifying pressure on Calcavecchia. 4 down, Seve walked with the stride of a winner. Contested every shot. He made Calcavecchia hole short putts. He dragged the match into the deep water of the closing holes. Under this relentless pressure, Calcavecchia began to unravel. He lost the 15th, then the 16th. By the time they reached the famous par 3 17th, the American's confidence had evaporated. Faced with a difficult tee shot over water, and with Seve watching him with predatory intensity, Calcavecchia hit a disastrous shot into the water hazard. The psychological collapse was total. Calcavecchia eventually halved the match, a result that felt like crushing defeat given his earlier lead. He was famously found crying on the beach after the round, distraught at having let the point slip. The Calcavecchia match reveals that Seve's greatest weapon wasn't a cough. It was his will. The arrogance to believe he could win from 4 down induced a panic in Calcavecchia that no amount of silence could have prevented. Calcavecchia acknowledged Seve's talent, the best imagination, the best short game. He was a victim of Seve's ability to project superiority, even when the scoreboard said otherwise. The relationship between Nick Faldo and Seve was unique. They weren't enemies on the battlefield like the Americans. They were uneasy allies in the European camp. Their rivalry was fueled by a clash of personalities. Faldo, the mechanical man, versus Seve, the artist. Faldo's game was built on a swing rebuilt from scratch to hold up under immense pressure. He was process-oriented, stoic, and aloof. Seve was instinct-driven, emotional, and fiery. Faldo often made comments that implied criticism of Seve's cavalier approach. He questioned the longevity of a game built on recovery shots rather than fairways. To Faldo, consistency was the ultimate virtue. To Seve, brilliance was. However, beneath the surface friction lay a shared arrogance of isolation. In later years, Faldo heavily criticized the modern generation of golfers for being too chummy. He stated, "In our era, we were competitors, very separate individuals, and we kept it that way. Imagine myself sitting with Norman and Pricey and having lunch together." Significantly, when Faldo made these comments, Seve was present and nodding vigorously in agreement. The men believed that true greatness required a barrier between oneself and one's rivals. This reveals a crucial insight. Seve's arrogance wasn't just directed at Americans, it was a fundamental part of his competitive philosophy. He believed that to beat someone, you could not be their friend. The thaw in the Faldo relationship is one of the most touching arcs in golf history. By 1995, Seve's game was in steep decline due to back issues, while Faldo was still a force. During the Ryder Cup at Oak Hill, after a hard-fought European victory, the two men shared an emotional embrace on the 18th green. Faldo, famously reserved, broke down in tears. "I lost it when Seve hugged Nick," in tears. It was huge for Nick to be appreciated by a peer of Seve's stature. In that moment, the arrogance of the past was recognized as the armor they both wore to survive the crucible of elite sport. To fully understand the Master of Gamesmanship label, we must look at the specific tactics Seve employed. His rivals accused him of auditory distraction, coughing during backswings and clearing his throat at critical moments. Azinger, Floyd, and Calcavecchia all made these accusations. They denied intent, attributing it to hay fever or coincidence. They accused him of rule manipulation, questioning drops, repairing spike marks, and requesting ball changes. Azinger and Irwin were the primary accusers. Seve's defense was that he was protecting the field and that the rules were for everyone. Criticized his pace and timing, arriving late at the 1980 U.S. Open and slowing down play when opponents had momentum. Accused him of verbal intimidation, asking Azinger, "Is this how you want to play?" and calling opponents liars. Finally, there was the stare. Intense eye contact and refusal to concede putts or matches, particularly against Calcavecchia. The cumulative effect of these tactics was the creation of a force field. Seve didn't just play the course, he occupied the entire competitive space. His opponents were constantly reacting to him, checking if he was coughing, watching where he dropped, wondering if he would concede a putt. By occupying 50% of his opponent's mental bandwidth, Seve effectively played against half a player. The accounts of Azinger, Irwin, Calcavecchia, Faldo, and Floyd converge on a single truth. Seve Ballesteros was arrogant by the standards of the gentlemanly game they thought they were playing. Seve wasn't playing that game. He was playing a game of survival and conquest on behalf of a continent that had been marginalized for decades. To Irwin, his arrogance was disrespect for the rules. To Azinger, it was cynical manipulation of sportsmanship. Floyd, it was a territorial challenge. To Calcavecchia, it was a terrifying refusal to die. To Faldo, it was necessary isolation. In the final analysis, Seve's arrogance was his greatest club. It allowed him to hit shots from parking lots when logic dictated a layup. Allowed him to stare down the entire American team when the odds were impossible. Allowed him to transform the Ryder Cup from a polite exhibition into the greatest spectacle in golf. As Azinger, his fiercest rival, ultimately conceded, Seve was great, and he was great for the game. The Matador may have been arrogant. Without that arrogance, the Bull would have won. If this story of golf's most controversial legend fascinated you, make sure you're subscribed and check out our next video exploring more untold rivalries that changed the game forever.